My name is Chloe Emerson. I was 8 years old when my mother looked me in the eye and said I was a curse, then left me on a doorstep to prove it. That night, I learned what silence really sounded like. It wasn't peace, it was abandonment. But this story isn't just about what they did, it's about what I built. How I took the red stamped letters they never opened and turned them into a doorway for thousands who never had one. If you've ever been erased by the people meant to protect you, if you've ever stood outside a locked door wondering what you did wrong, then stay with me. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive like thunder. It walks in quietly, holding receipts. I can still hear the echo of that door slamming shut. It didn't just cut off the cold October air, it cut me off from being someone's daughter. That night, I became something else. Something quieter. Something smaller. The argument started the way most did. Hushed voices that rose like steam from the kitchen, sharp as the clink of ceramic mugs. I sat on the floor in the hallway, drawing with a broken crayon, sketching shapes I couldn't name. The house smelled like burnt toast and bitterness. She was the beginning of all this, Mom snapped. The day she came home from that hospital, everything unraveled. My father didn't reply right away. Then came the thud of a chair pushed back. You're not saying it out loud, Janice, but you're thinking it. You've always thought it. Silence. Then her voice, low and metallic. She's a curse. I froze, the crayon slipping from my fingers. My heart went tight like a fist. Mom walked into the hallway, not even looking at me. Go pack a bag, Chloe. I stood up. Are we going somewhere? She didn't answer, just turned toward the bedroom. Her steps echoed across the linoleum. Dad lit a cigarette and didn't meet my eyes. I waited for him to say something. Anything. But all I saw was a man folded inward like a torn map. I packed Penny first, my stuffed rabbit, the one with the fraying ears and missing eye. I shoved her into my backpack between two pairs of socks and a sweater that didn't fit anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't ask questions. Something in the air told me this wasn't the kind of silence you filled with noise. Outside, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. The wind stung my cheeks as Mom drove, one hand on the wheel, the other trembling over the gear shift. She didn't speak. The radio stayed off. I watched the streetlights flicker by like soldiers turning their backs. When we stopped, I recognized the neighborhood. Grandma and Grandpa's street, the one with the white fence that peeled every winter. I thought we were visiting, maybe staying the night. She walked me to the doorstep, knocked once, waited, knocked again. No answer. Then she bent down, adjusted my collar, smoothed my hair. Her eyes didn't match her voice when she said, "Be good." Wait. I reached out, catching her wrist. Mom, aren't you? The door didn't open, but the car door did. Then the engine. Then silence. The porch light flickered. The cold settled into my socks. I stood there for a long time, hugging my backpack. My breath came out in small clouds, vanishing before they touched the air. That's when I saw her. Marla Jensen, the widow from across the street. She wore a navy coat and house slippers. Her eyes narrowed, then softened as she took in the scene. A child, a bag, a closed door. She didn't speak right away, just opened her own door and stood aside. I walked in without a word. The house smelled like cinnamon and something older, maybe the pages of books or worn blankets. She guided me into the living room, placed a teacup on the table, and handed me a sweater that smelled faintly of pine and pipe smoke. I sat by the window, wrapping the sweater tight. Penny peeked out of the backpack, one ear drooping like a question mark. Across the street, our house loomed dark. Not a single light in the windows. Like it had already forgotten me. I don't know how long I sat there before I understood. No one was coming back? No one would. The sweater itched. The tea went cold. Still, Marla didn't press. She sat in the armchair, flipping through a magazine she didn't read. Outside, a leaf tapped at the glass like it wanted in. The silence between us felt thick, but not cruel. Eventually, she looked up and asked, Do you want to call someone? I shook my head, learning for the first time to stay silent to survive. I sent them letters for 4 straight years. Every single one came back with the same 3 words: return to sender. A child doesn't stop hoping all at once. Hope dies, envelope by envelope. The first letter I wrote was for Christmas 2005. I'd spent a week drawing the card myself. Penny with a Santa hat, standing in front of a crooked tree. I used glitter glue, dotted stars across the night sky. I signed it. Love, Chloe. Marla didn't say much when I asked for a stamp. She just handed one over and watched as I pressed it carefully in the corner, my little fingers fumbling to line it straight. We walked to the mailbox together. I dropped it in with both hands. A full-body prayer. 3 weeks later, it came back. Same envelope, same drawing. Only now there were 3 red words stamped cold across the front. Return to sender. Marla didn't open it. She just placed it on the kitchen counter beside the sugar jar. I didn't touch it for days, but I wrote again and again. For birthdays, for Easter, for the first day of school. Dear Mom and Dad, I always began. But after that first year, I started shortening it. Eventually, I dropped Mom altogether and used just J. Something about that letter, stiff and impersonal, felt like the right size for the space between us. Marla never told me to stop, but she never told me to keep going either. She let me use her best pens. She made space on the table. She even helped me address the envelopes, at first. But she never asked what I was writing, never peeked, never offered pity. At school, things were colder in a different way. When I won the regional spelling bee in 4th grade, I scanned the crowd for someone familiar. The representative desk had a folded placard. Reserved, family. But no one sat there. Just the janitor stacking folding chairs in the back. Mrs. Harris smiled with her whole face when she handed me the trophy. She whispered, I hope you know how proud I am. But she still called home that afternoon, just to try. The number didn't work. In 6th grade, I got a poetry award. The poem was about rain, how it kept falling even when no one was watching. Marla clipped the article from the town paper and stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a rooster. She didn't say anything, but she refilled the hot cocoa without me asking. Once, the school tried to give me the Most Resilient Award. It was a student vote. I didn't know that part until later. But when they realized no one would be there to clap, to take pictures, to frame the little certificate, they canceled the announcement. Said they'd restructure the format. No one ever asked how that felt. Maybe they thought I didn't notice. I always noticed. At home, the letters kept coming back. Dozens of them. By the end of 8th grade, I had a drawer full of unopened hopes, a museum of neglect, postmarked rejection. One night, I brought them all out. I lined them up on the floor of Marla's living room, envelopes like small tombstones, birthday wishes, report card updates, hand-drawn hearts. Each one stamped with the same red ink, each one screaming the same thing without saying a word. Marla stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, not in judgment, more like she was holding herself together. Are you sure you want to keep them? She asked. I nodded, but I didn't touch them. I just looked. No one's ever going to open them, I said. She didn't argue. That night, I wrote one last postcard. It had a picture of a lighthouse on the front. An old one, black and white. I drew a little stick figure in the corner, holding up a flashlight, as if trying to signal someone far away. Then I tore it in half. Dropped it in the trash without a sound. I didn't cry. I just stopped. Stopped writing J in my diary. Stopped drawing hearts on the backs of envelopes. Stopped imagining someone reading them and regretting every word they never said. But as I stared at the stack, my little paper army lined in defeat, I whispered something I didn't know I still had inside me. One day, they'll wish they read these. They erased me from their lives. So I started writing myself back in, line by line, pixel by pixel. The old drawing was gone, but I drew a new one, This time I was walking toward a door, not waiting at one. The letter came on a Tuesday. I found it in the pile of Marla's unopened junk mail. My name was printed cleanly in the top left corner, in a font I didn't recognize. Chloe Emerson. Still their name, not mine. It was a bank statement. A trust fund, small but real, had been left to me by my grandmother. I remembered her vaguely. Soft hands, sharp perfume, a blue brooch she used to wear at Christmas. The balance was 0. There were 2 large withdrawals over the past few years. The last one noted a check issued to Douglas Emerson. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I printed the statement, folded it once, and slid it between the pages of my old sketchbook. The one with Penny on the first page, before I'd stopped drawing animals altogether. That was the day I started drawing people again. I moved into Marla's spare room, the office, as she used to call it. She cleared a corner for me, placed an old desk lamp, and told me gently, "You'll need good light to build things." I didn't ask what she meant. I just opened my laptop. That spring, I met Kayla. She showed up at the coffee shop where I worked after school, eyes red, hoodie damp from the rain. I brought her napkins before she asked. She smiled, but it cracked halfway through. Later, I found her sleeping behind the library dumpster. No shoes. A swollen ankle. She'd been kicked out for coming out. I didn't hesitate. I brought her to Marla's. She didn't ask questions, just folded another towel. While Kayla slept, I drafted a temporary guardianship letter using a template I found online. Added resources, contacts, cold language, clear language. I printed a copy and slid it under her tea mug the next morning. She didn't say thank you, just hugged me tight. Then looser. Then again. That night, I wrote the first line of RiseWell. Welcome to RiseWell. You are not a mistake. I posted a link to a small online forum, one for kids who had aged out, phased out, or simply disappeared from the system. I added no photo, no bio. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to be found. 2 days later, the first comment came. I thought I was the only one. From that moment, I was no longer just Chloe. I was admin. I was email responder. I was quiet supporter behind a keyboard. Marla brought me snacks I didn't notice eating. Kayla stayed for 6 months. She left a sticky note when she moved out. You made me want a future. One night in the library, she found me working on the site, adding a new form for temporary housing leads. She looked at the header I'd written. Start here. I didn't know you could make words feel like doors, she said, hugging me from behind. That was the first time I let myself believe it. That maybe my voice, typed and quiet, could undo some of the noise that had nearly drowned me. I used to think I was garbage, she whispered. Your page made me feel clean. Her words stung, but not from pain, from recognition. My mother once said I ruined everything, that I was the beginning of all the wrong turns. I believed her for years. Now I didn't. That night, back in my room, I opened my laptop. The site was ready. Resources, stories, helplines, message boards. Everything I'd wanted when I was 8. At the top right corner of the screen, a blue button. Publish. I didn't hesitate. I clicked. It was a knock I hadn't heard in years, gentle, uncertain. Like guilt had fingers. I used to knock on their door. Now they were at mine. If only they knew. The RiseWell office was quiet that morning, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows, casting clean lines across the floor. The space smelled like cedar and fresh paper. Bethany liked lighting those small woodwick candles before meetings. I let her. Some rituals helped us forget what the world could be. My desk was still warm from the tea I'd just set down when Bethany popped her head in. There's a couple here for the 11 a.m. slot. Emerson's. I stilled. Not even a flinch. I'd practiced this moment for years. Send them to Conference B, I said, reaching for my notebook. I'll meet them there. They were seated by the time I walked in, older than I remembered and smaller. Time had carved them down. Janice's hair had faded to a brittle gray, tied too tightly. Douglas sat with his hands on the table like they didn't know where else to go. Neither recognized me. Of course they didn't. Why would they? They'd never come back for me. Why start now? I closed the door gently behind me and took the seat across from them. The table was wide, intentionally. "Thank you for meeting with us," Douglas began, his voice cautious. "We heard about RiseWell through the outreach network, the recovery programs." Janice nodded, lips pursed. "Families like ours, with history. We're just looking for a chance, a grant, something to help others like us. We want to heal. Heal." The words sat like lead between us. I let the silence stretch, watched them squirm. Janice spoke again. "We lost a daughter, years ago. Vanished, not a word. It's been unbearable." My heart didn't race. I'd trained it not to. Bethany knocked once, opened the door to drop off a file. "Chloe, the board wants a quick call. Should I push it?" Janice froze. Douglas blinked. "No, it can wait," I said, taking the folder and nodding at Bethany, who smiled and left. Janice's hand twitched. "Chloe," she echoed, voice suddenly brittle. What did you say your name was?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the file drawer beside me, pulled out a small box, matte black, unmarked. I slid it across the table. Inside, perfectly preserved, were a dozen letters. Creased, faded, each stamped with 3 familiar words in red. "Return to sender." "I believe you said you lost your daughter?" I asked softly. Douglas opened the box, lifted one envelope. His fingers shook. "She wrote you," I continued, my voice level. "For years. Holidays, achievements, even on your birthdays." Janice's breath hitched. "You must have been so devastated," I said, "not receiving a single letter." The box sat open, like a casket. Janice reached for one envelope, but drew her hand back. Her face had drained of color. Her lips trembled. She sent these?" "She did." My eyes didn't leave hers. "No one ever got back to her," I said. "Not once. But maybe you thought she wouldn't remember. That abandoned children just disappear, like misfiled paperwork." Silence, the kind that presses against your ribs. Douglas swallowed. We thought maybe she was gone." I nodded slowly. "She was," I said. "From your life, at least." Janice pushed her chair back, stumbled slightly, her knuckles white against the armrest. She still didn't ask who I was. She didn't need to, because the door behind her was still open. But my heart wasn't. I once begged for their love. Now they begged for my logo on their proposal. I'd kept the file labeled Unforgiven for a reason, but that didn't mean I'd never use it. The projector cast a pale light across the conference room, illuminating a logo they'd never recognized until today. RiseWell in crisp blue serif, haloed in white. Douglas cleared his throat. Janice folded and unfolded a paper napkin, eyes darting between me and the glowing screen. I hadn't said a word since opening the box of returned letters. I let the silence stitch itself around them. "Before we continue," I said, tapping the wireless remote, "I'd like to share RiseWell's due diligence process. We don't fund based on story alone. We run a full ethical audit." The next slide appeared. Applicant profile, Emerson Household Recovery Foundation. Beneath it, a short tagline. Submitted October 5th, 2025. Janice flinched. "We pull legal and financial records," I continued. "Public data, bank statements, things some people forget were ever connected to someone else's name." A timeline slid onto the screen, each year marked by a red dot. 2009, I said. The year a minor's trust was completely withdrawn under guardianship access. The guardian was Janice Emerson. The child? Chloe Emerson. Douglas opened his mouth. I tapped again. The bank statement appeared. $12,437.44. I read aloud. Removed over 5 months. No receipts. No transfers back. That doesn't mean, Douglas started, his voice hoarse. It means, I cut in, that someone drained their daughter's only inheritance and left her at a neighbor's door. He leaned back in his chair as if the wood had betrayed him. We didn't, Janice started, but the sentence collapsed under her breath. She was 8, I said. She waited by the window. She kept sending letters. She believed she was the one who broke everything. Bethany stood just outside the glass wall of the room, frozen mid-step, her tablet clutched to her chest. Chloe, she whispered, not to me, but to herself. Understanding, blooming, awful and clear. On the screen, a scanned page appeared. A letter they never read. RiseWell's founding article, 2012. It had gone viral in underground networks before it was ever credited to an author. I wrote this, I said softly, at 16. Janice's hand flew to her mouth. Douglas shifted uncomfortably. She was dramatic, he muttered, mostly to himself. I advanced the slide. An electronic signature. Dated. Legal. Janice's. A gasp. A chair scraped back. You can't prove I just did, I said. They were sitting directly beneath a framed print I'd hung years ago, my very first RiseWell post. Neither of them had looked up. Now, as the projector dimmed, it became visible. You are not a mistake. My voice was level, even. I'm not your daughter, I said. I'm your proof. Proof of what you tried to erase. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan. Then the door opened behind me. A man in a charcoal suit stepped in, his badge clipped neatly to his lapel. This meeting is over, he said, eyes cold and unreadable. And this tape is archived. Janice turned to him, her lips trembling. But he didn't look at her. He looked at me, and I nodded. They left me with no bed, no food, no name. But today it's my table, and there's no seat for them. I was once the unwanted guest. Now I host the banquet of survival. The ballroom shimmered with warm lights that fell in soft layers across dark velvet drapes and polished floors. Waiters moved like shadows between tables dressed in silver and navy. Laughter echoed gently, underscored by the soft clink of cutlery and live strings playing in a far corner. 10 years of RiseWell. 10 years since I posted one line on a dark web forum meant for no one, and found someone. I stood near the stage watching as the final video played. A young woman in her 20s smiled through the screen, holding her toddler on her lap. Without RiseWell, I wouldn't be here. My son wouldn't be here. I thought I was nothing. Now I'm enough. Applause rose around the room, raw and unfiltered. Then silence as I stepped up to the podium. No script, just a breath. We were told we were mistakes, I said, my voice steady under the lights. But we rewrote that sentence. I scanned the crowd. Not donors, not followers, survivors. Kayla stood near the front, eyes bright with tears. She wore the RiseWell pin on her blazer like armor. Somewhere behind her, I saw Marla. Frail now, hair a snowbank, but posture as straight as ever. She had let me in without asking questions. She had stayed. A man in security uniform leaned over to whisper something in Bethany's ear. She paled, then stepped away from the entrance. I didn't need to ask. They were here. I didn't turn. Tonight, I said, we honor not the fall, but the rise. We honor those who stayed, those who opened a door when the world slammed it shut. I turned slightly and gestured. Marla made her slow way to the stage, assisted by Kayla, her steps small but unshaking. This woman, I said, never asked where I came from. She only asked if I was hungry. She is the first door that didn't close. I placed the medal, silver in the shape of an open door, around Marla's neck. She looked at me with quiet eyes, then patted my arm once. That was all. Applause thundered. No one noticed the pair lingering by the back exit. Someone tried to step forward. Janice. Bethany moved first. "They're not on the list," she told security. "No badge, no entry." They were escorted out, no drama, just silence. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. A message from Vanessa. "I'm sorry for being quiet, but you saved me from something I can't even name." I let out a slow breath. There were losses, and there were things never meant to be found. The event wound down. People embraced, photos were taken, the lights dimmed. I stepped into the hotel lobby just as my parents did. They looked older, not sadder, just smaller. Douglas opened his mouth. Janice stared. A staff member next to me leaned in. "Family?" I looked at them once, then at the hallway stretching beyond them, the ballroom behind me, the people who mattered. "Never met them," I said. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in, turned, and looked back one last time. The doors closed. This time it was my decision. I didn't set out to become a symbol. I just wanted to be seen. Not spotlighted, not celebrated, just seen. By the family whose name I bore, whose crest hung above the fireplace I once dusted as a child, whose traditions dictated everything from how we spoke to how we smiled. But there's a difference between being overlooked and being erased. And somewhere along the years, they crossed that line. Not in one clean strike, but in quiet, calculated omissions. A missing name here, an unspoken invitation there, one less seat, one more edit. Until the absence became louder than any presence I could offer. I spent too long thinking if I worked harder, loved deeper, gave more, they'd remember me. I'd earn my way back into a story I was born into. But memory built on hierarchy is fragile. And truth? It doesn't fade. It waits. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. A guest list. An old voicemail. A sculpture I couldn't finish because I no longer remembered the curve of forgiveness. That's when I knew. If they could curate history, so could I. Only mine wouldn't erase anyone. So I stopped asking to be let in and started building something of my own. Not for revenge. Not even for recognition. Just for the clarity of standing somewhere I had chosen, under a roof I had raised, with walls that held stories I refused to let be rewritten. When they finally showed up at my door, with gift baskets and forced smiles, they didn't know the cameras were rolling. They didn't know the gallery lights would dim and the footage would play. They didn't know I had archived every quiet betrayal, not for vengeance, but for proof. They stood still while the truth unraveled around them. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. The Autumn Collective isn't just a name. It's what happens when a forgotten child becomes an architect of remembrance. Every chair in that gallery carries a name, a story, a voice. Some of them have never been heard before, but they matter. And when a little girl named Emma, a niece I didn't even know I had, handed me a drawing and whispered, "You're not the aunt they chose. You're the one I choose." I felt the ground shift. That moment was heavier than any family crest. That's the legacy I choose. Not one etched in inheritance, but one carved from survival. I never imagined I'd see them again. Not like this. When I was 8, I stood outside a door that wouldn't open, clutching a backpack, my rabbit named Penny tucked deep inside, pretending I understood what it meant to be unwanted. 2 decades later, I watched the same people stand on the other side of a different door, this time mine. They wore faces etched by age, fatigue, and perhaps, somewhere beneath the surface, regret. But regret is not the same as apology. And I was not the same girl waiting to be let in. They didn't recognize me at first. That was the poetry of it. I had erased myself from their story, only to write a new one where they no longer held the pen. For years, I wrote them letters with trembling hands and hopeful ink. Every envelope that returned, stamped "Return to Sender," became a nail sealing the coffin of a childhood I never truly had. I kept them all. Not to mourn, just to remember. To remind myself what silence sounds like when it comes from the people who are supposed to call you family. But silence has a texture. You learn to live inside it. Then one day, you learn to speak louder than it. RiseWell wasn't born out of vengeance. It was born out of necessity. If I couldn't find safety, I would build it. If no one held the door open for me, I would weld the hinges myself and open it for others. I never plastered my name on the website. I didn't need recognition. I needed reach. Still, the moment they walked into the conference room and called me Miss Jensen, I realized something I hadn't prepared for. Closure doesn't feel like fire. It feels like control. They came asking for funding, talking about a daughter who disappeared, claiming they'd been searching ever since. I let them talk. Let them stack lies like bricks, building a narrative where they were the grieving parents, left behind. They didn't know I'd read the story years ago, in their handwriting. Withdrawal slips, voicemails ignored, signatures on documents that emptied the last thing my grandmother left for me. When I pulled out the letter and read the return address, they froze. "You're her," my mother finally whispered. "No," I replied. "She was erased. I'm what grew in her place." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to love me. I showed them the truth. I watched them unravel. Later, at the gala, I stood behind a podium in a tailored black suit, my hair pulled back, my voice steady. A room full of people clapped not for who I was, but for what we'd all survived. Marla was there, frail but fierce. She never called herself a hero, but that night, I gave her the medal engraved with 2 words: the first door. My parents showed up uninvited. They stood near the edge of the ballroom like ghosts at a celebration that no longer needed haunting. Security handled them gently. I didn't watch them leave. I had nothing left to retrieve from their presence. Someone asked me, "Are those relatives of yours?" I smiled. Number, I've never met them. In truth, I met them long ago, when I was 8. And I said goodbye to them on a freezing night, wrapped in a blanket too big for my shoulders, in a house that didn't know how to hurt me. Now, when I open a door, I do it with intention. Not everyone gets a seat at my table. Not because I'm cruel, but because I remember what it was like to be hungry while someone else threw your name away. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't always knock with thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding receipts. She didn't ruin their lives. She revealed the truth they buried and hoped would never resurface. And in doing so, she reminded us all. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Some doors we wait at in vain. Some doors we build ourselves. And when they close, it's not out of anger, but out of self-respect. If you're still here, thank you. Not just for watching, but for staying through every word that once went unread. For sitting with silence long enough to hear what it was trying to say. For standing in a space where the forgotten are finally named. This wasn't just Chloe's story. It was a map, drawn in pencil, stained with rain, leading us from the cold porch of abandonment to the warm, quiet fire of belonging. Maybe you saw yourself in a letter never answered, or a door that never opened. Maybe you know what it means to grow up in the echo of someone else's decision. But here's what matters. You're still here. Breathing, watching, listening. And maybe, for the first time, being seen. RiseWell didn't start with a mission statement. It started with a child's drawing. A crayon, a rabbit named Penny, and the quiet refusal to disappear. And if that small voice could become a platform, if a returned letter could become a movement, imagine what your truth could do. Imagine the doors you could build. So if this story stayed with you, if it moved something you haven't touched in years, please, share it with someone who needs a light in the dark. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from or who you're remembering. Subscribe. so you never miss a voice that deserves to be heard. Because this channel isn't about virality, it's about visibility. It's not about revenge, it's about reclamation. And if one forgotten girl could build a sanctuary out of silence, so can you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for walking this path with us, for bearing witness, for choosing to stay. Until next time, keep your voice steady, keep your heart open, and if the world won't give you a door, build one. We'll be waiting on the other side.